Okay. Are we here? Are we active? I think I might just have to read Plato because I don't know. I don't have anything prepared. I didn't prepare for this. I was busy. I was exercising. I was bathed. I was doing all kinds of good, healthy things. Main concern is lung scarring, says Laugh Track Editor. We just need to get big lungs. This is a good time to quit smoking. If you are a smoker, if you are a vapor, they say, oh, vaping, it's fine to vape. Vaping is okay. And legitimately, vaping is probably better than smoking, at least in terms of the secondhand effects. When I'm around smokers, it's a little worse than when I'm around vapors. Vapors, they smell like cherry pie and vanilla and all these good scents. But ultimately, there is such a thing as a vapor's cough and a vapor shortness of breath. It's just not good to put a bunch of vapor in your lungs. Doesn't matter. You could smoke lettuce. Do people remember that? When the congressman representing the tobacco industry, he went up in Congress and he said, you could smoke lettuce. Doesn't matter if you're smoking tobacco, nicotine products, or if you're smoking lettuce. Any smoke is bad for you. Doesn't matter if you're smoking in the kitchen. When you cook meat, there's carcinogens. When you roast meat, when you have smoky meats, when you smoke your meats and your brisket, it is a carcinogen. It is bad. So who had big lungs? Contratenors. So contratenors, I believe, is a category of vocal range, a person who is a contratenor. My girlfriend got sick today, unsure if corona or common cold, and I met with her 2 days ago. Well, that's not good. But remember, the rate of transference is not 100%. However, I did see something today that said there's about estimates that 50% of people living in the United Kingdom could already have coronavirus. Now, that seems a little bit ridiculous, right? Because the United Kingdom has 40 million people, 60 million people. There's a lot of people there. So the idea that there's millions and millions of people infected with coronavirus, well, we have to take that with a grain of salt, remember, because when we say that, there's going to be a lot of people who never show any symptoms, and so effectively, for their own sake, they're not infected, but they are people who are going to transfer the virus to others. Let's see, they were castrated, didn't have testosterone to harden their rib cages properly. Okay, that's weird. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what I refer to them as the castrati, which is the Italian term. But apparently a contratenores, or contratenors, is the other term. But yeah, the coronavirus, I mean, it could be that there's millions and millions of people with it as we speak. I mean, we don't usually think of viruses or parasites this way. Like, a lot of people have parasites, a lot of people have viruses. I could have a virus right now. But if my immune system's strong enough, that virus enters into my body. Like, let's say someone is sick and they get up in my face and they cough directly in my open mouth. That virus is going to enter into my body, but my immune system is going to determine whether or not I actually get sick. If I have a healthy, strong immune system, maybe I show no symptoms whatsoever. I still have it, I still carry it, and if I cough once or I sneeze or something, as I do regularly, I can still spread that virus even if I'm not feeling the effects of being infected, even if I suffer no problems as a result. So we're learning a lot about science with this coronavirus. And there's a lot going on. I mean, everybody's talking about it. That's why I hesitate to talk about it. Maybe that'll just be the intro to this. The Discord link is there. People, I've got a cowboy hat for Play-Doh. The top 3 choices right now are cooking videos, which I have a lot of food right now that I don't want to eat, because I've been mixing sardines with everything. I'm like, I have these sardines, so I'm just going to throw them in everything I make. And I'm kind of sick of it at this point. Sardines, in my opinion, are best eaten cold. Not raw, they're cooked, of course, but cold and just straight out of the can. not cooked, not mixed with anything else. And so I basically ruined a batch of chicken by mixing sardines in with them. Bad choice. I said tough times call for tough measures. It wasn't the right decision. I should just eat them separately. Also, buying a bunch of sardines, while it was very convenient, was not a smart decision. I should have bought canned chicken or just something very plain and inoffensive. But I didn't do that. I wasn't smart. I was smart enough to prepare the day before the shelves went empty, but not smart enough to prepare well. So, quantitatively I was in the right place, but qualitatively no. So I don't really want to do any cooking for a while. When I run out of food, which I will starve for a few days, I suppose, because I don't want to eat what's in the fridge. But eventually I will cook again, and maybe that'll be on D Live, This channel is supposed to be high quality. This is supposed to be the best of the best content, and all of the silly stuff is supposed to go on D Live. That's the plan. That's what we're moving toward. This is funny. We're going to delete that option. Interesting. Anyway, so behind cooking videos, which is beloved by all, we've got nationalism videos with 8 votes deconstructing nationalism. I wish I could get Smooth Critical on here again, because he's one of these compatibilists who wants to have a fusion of nationalism and minoritarianism. And we could talk about that. We could rehearse the talking points. So fundamentally, when I have a view that's very similar to Arthur Toynbee. Arthur Toynbee talks about the creative minority. He talks about these big civilizational blocks, and then he talks about the creative minority. And when I look at history, whether it's ancient history or modern day history, I see creative minorities. Now, that term creative in isolation is often thought of as being artistic creativity. But as we know from Sun Tzu and also Machiavelli, we also know that war is an art. And actually, the further back you go, the more recognized it is that the liberal arts really encompass basically any skill. As we're reading Plato on D Live, the arts can refer to really any sort of skill. There's the art of the rhapsode, the art of philosophy, the art of science, the art of war. So really, everything is a form of art, and to be a genius, to be highly skilled in a field, is really to have creativity. So I agree with Toynbee when he talks about the creative minorities that are really the leaders of civilization that are vital. When the Soviets and the Nazis wanted to destroy the state of Poland, they didn't just start killing people randomly, remember. They started killing the priests and the intellectuals and the college professors and the officer class. They started killing the best people of Poland. That was cruel and brutal and terrible, but it was also logical, because if you want to destroy a people, you want to destroy civilization, you want to destroy a group, you have to either peel off or kill off the best and the brightest and the most creative in every field, because all the different fields, whether it's the more abstract, the more, again, as we start to go into the class structure, whether it's the more priestly, the more warrior type, or whether it is the more mercantile type, if you eliminate those people, then the masses themselves are left leaderless. It's like a chicken with the head cut off. The chicken can still run around. I mean, the masses still exist, and they're very important when we think about a chicken. Of course, a chicken can't live with just a head. A chicken needs its wings, and it needs its feet, it needs its body, it needs its feathers. So all of that is very important. But the chicken with the head cut off, once you sever that connection between head and body, the two, they are separated, and they cannot exist independently. They are part of an organic whole. When we look at masses of people, in the example of Poland, of course, not every person of quality could be eliminated in Poland, and because quality is a spectrum, ultimately there's a relativistic aspect to it. You can't eliminate all people of quality. Once you do, and I think the bell curve is a good visual. Is the topic chickens today? The topic is chickens. Okay. Talking about chickens. That'll be the new title. Talking about chickens. All right, that'll be the title there. So we're talking about chickens, and we're talking about Poland, and we're talking about quality, and we're talking about relativism, and we're talking about bell curves because they're good visualization. I have yet to, because every day I think I have these videos stored up and I'm waiting to throw them on the channel, but I'm like, I don't really want to put more than one video on the channel in a single day because that's just too much. But if we have those videos stored up and we want to put them out, I just keep delaying it because I'm like, well, I want to live stream today. I want to live stream today. So it never gets out there. But someday maybe it will. When all of this is over, maybe those videos will see the light of day. And it's a critique of intelligence that when we think about the bell curve as a meme related to IQ, I think we have to dismiss that as a sole arbiter of quality, right? IQ is not just not the most important thing, but it's actually sometimes harmful. It's actually sometimes, when IQ is combined with, bad behavior, then you get really bad outcomes. I'd rather have dumb people who are good-natured and follow good rules and good behavior. But at least the visuality of the bell curve is basically, if you have a population and you cut off some segment of the bell curve, basically what happens is it's almost like a physical system, like sand particles, and or you can think about magnetic ferrous particles, like little pieces of iron as they gather around a magnetic field. What happens is sort of the almost the middle sort of lowers and then fills in the gaps on either end. And that's sort of what happens when you cut off the head. The Romans had this concept of decimation, that you kill every 10th soldier. Now, that wasn't done in a qualitative fashion. It was done arbitrarily to instill fear in the soldiers. But you have this, which is quite a weird concept, by the way, the concept of decimation. It's kind of absurd. Like, we're going to deliberately lower the population of our military to punish them. It's like, how could you possibly have an empire that survives and thrives when, on its face, it seems like something that would be very self-destructive. But somehow the Romans got it done. Or the Mayans, the Mayans are taking the virgins and cutting out the heart and eating the heart. It's like, how can a civilization survive like that? Well, they did for a very long time. So, a lot of times when people say, oh, liberalism is so crazy, liberalism is unstable. We can't just believe in equality. We can't just believe in democracy. This is going to collapse tomorrow. It's like, okay, well, yeah, there are some things about that are questionable. But when we look at the ancient past, we also see things that are very, very questionable. And so this hyper-rationalism of the system has to be rational in order to work, in order to be stable. In some ways, the system has to be irrational to be stable. And sometimes I think humans depend upon a certain irrationality in order to have stability. How Ken pronounces the name Albert Camus will tell us how cultured. Is it supposed to be Camus? Is it Albert Camus? Whatever, French people, I don't care. But we were talking about Poland, we were talking about bell curves, and the reason I brought it up is because I think it's a good visualization of how a population works when we're talking about inequality, strength, height, really anything. And so if you cut off a segment of the population, ultimately the middle will sort of regenerate the high and the low by both a process of degeneration or negative selection and a process of regeneration, which is positive selection. So if you have a population, let's say you have wolves, this was actually done in the Soviet Union, you can re-domesticate wolves into dogs. I'm not sure if it was done over the course of the entire Soviet Union, the whole 70 years, or if it was done in a quicker time span, because of course wolves, it takes them 3 to 7 years to become fertile. So if you can breed wolves every 3 years, over the course of 30 years, you can have 10 generations of wolves, which is pretty impactful. There's a lot you can do in terms of selective pressure in 10 generations. Camus, yeah. That's moo cow. We're talking about chickens. We're not talking about moo cow, Albert Camus. But we're talking about bell curves. So we're talking about Poland. So we're talking about how basically when we look at the creative minorities, when we look at the body head dichotomy, when we look at the chicken, because the chicken is this multicellular organism, if you actually cut its head off, it doesn't have the possibility of regeneration. Of course, chickens can degenerate, they can become old and die, but their method of regeneration is reproduction. And so collectively, a civilization or a group can reproduce, and it can regenerate aspects of itself that were previously lost. Any tragedy, any calamity is an opportunity for growth. I mean, what is the tritism or the truism? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That is true. If it does not destroy you, if it doesn't decimate you or eliminate you, then ultimately every crisis, every tragedy, every hardship does indeed actually make you stronger. That's a fact of life, and it's also true with cultures. So in a way, when we look at something like coronavirus, of course, we are not happy with it. We are not overjoyed to see the destruction that it's bringing. But ultimately, if we can survive it, we will have a stronger and more robust civilization. I would point to history. I would point to the Black Plague. The Black Plague happened in the 1300s, specifically. Some of the worst years were in 1340, when I was looking the other day at how it impacted the balance of power in Eastern Europe, where the Russians at that time were fighting the Mongols. And by the way, the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christian Church, was on the side of the Mongols at that time, interestingly enough. I thought all the cool intellectual kids got into French existentialism in high school or college. I never really got into French existentialism. Can you count Deleuze as an existentialist? I don't know if he cares about existentialism. I guess the people I think are Sartre or Sartre or whatever. I just don't even like their names. I don't like their faces. I don't like their names. I don't like anything about them. I don't like that they're French. It's not that I hate all French people, but some French people are okay. I really don't have a big French audience. I don't have a lot of French speakers, maybe some Americans who speak French or something like that. But I don't interact with a whole bunch of French people. And it just seems like a very superfluous language. And to me, the lack of consonants and the overdependence upon vowels, at the same time, it's not. Whereas Italian has a good rhythm, a good beat between consonants and vowels. It's like ticka-la-ka-la. It's just the ta-ta-ta, la-la-la, litarilo, la-la-la-la. You know, there's a nice interplay between these, not glottal stops, but I'm forgetting the phonetic terms. But there's this kind of a staccato to it. In German, of course, people criticize it because it has too many fricatives and glottal stops, and it's too guttural, and it has too many consonants. Not enough vowels, which is a legitimate criticism. But when you look at French, to me, French, when I compare it to other languages, it just doesn't have those hard staccato rhythmic aspect to it. It's very soft. It's very it's very like this open-throated. It's like almost like the that musical instrument where you pass your hand within the like field of the musical instrument, changes the tenor. That's kind of what it sounds like to me. It's just not something I ever got into. But maybe if I had a formal education in it, and I could understand it, and I could appreciate the beauty of the French language. You know, I kind of rank languages based on how they appeal to my almost musical sensibilities. I have on the top, I guess I would say Germanic languages are just what I'm most experienced with. But to me, the way that Latin is pronounced and like the Italian, Latin, and those languages where there is a nice balance, I think, between vowels and consonants. Those are good. There's some controversy over how Latin should be pronounced. The way that I learned it was maybe with the English accent, and so in a way it's been Germanized in its pronunciation. It's Latin with a Germanic accent. But for whatever reason, I always liked Latin. I'd like to read the Aeneid sometime. Maybe we'll throw that up on the Discord. There is a link at the top if people want to scroll back in the chat for people who are not already in there. But let's do reading the Aeneid. I read the Aeneid. So we could do some Latin reading, some reading of the Aeneid. We'll throw some other ones in there. Reading Nietzsche. I read. What were we reading? Genealogy. Whoops. Genealogy of morals. Can I spell genealogy? Genealogy. Okay, that's a good word. I was thinking about the word kernel, and apparently the word kernel is actually like the Italian Spanish pronunciation, like Cornella, Kernelli or something. There's this R, and so that pronunciation was popular, but the old French way of writing it was colonel. And so to keep the anachronistic French spelling, we just look at the word colonel and we pronounce it colonel. English is a ridiculous language. English is almost like to Chinese levels of memorization with the spelling. Other languages don't have these spelling contests. You just look at the word and it's phonetic spelling and you know how to read it. That's just how languages are supposed to work. But there's this very anachronistic, formalistic, historical, locked in, English, for whatever reason. The French have this thing where they are very particular about protecting their language. The English don't really have anything like that. I suppose the Encyclopedia Britannica, or what would be a good Webster's dictionary or something. But the English language has been fiercely protected so that we still have this E at the end of words, this E that creates the long A and the long O. And in words like, or you have these diphthongs like OA, col, and originally it was pronounced koal, and it was probably pronounced faust, and it was, what's a word with an E at the end? I was thinking of coal, but that's not that's like the name coal, but it would be Collet. But we've made that E silent, but we're still there because you got to spell it. You got to keep that spelling. So when we read John Locke, or not even John Locke, when we read Shakespeare, when you go even back further, I'm trying to think of the furthest. What's the first English poet in our history, in the history of the Anglo-Saxon language that we can still read together? It's still considered modern English or past Middle English, technically. I'm trying to think of the. It's about these. I don't remember what it's about, but anyway, that's like the 1400s or maybe even late 1300s. We want to keep the similarity there. I think that one of the reasons for the rise of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was the fact that the regions of Poland were not as affected by the Black Plague as Western European countries. That's an interesting idea. I'm still not sure why that was. I was thinking about a theremin. I'm not sure why that was. It does seem to me that in 1340, the Mongols were dominating Russia. And they were also dominating the Baltic countries. There was basically a struggle between Viking warriors and the Mongols. And they were dominating Ukraine and certain places. And some of the first people to break away from Mongol rule were these Baltic countries like the Lithuanians. And they, with the Poles together, then formed this Commonwealth. And so I don't know why. I know Russia was affected by the Black Plague. I know Moscow was affected by the Black Plague. And I know that, of course, southern Italy with its trade routes, as well as the Hanseatic League, was affected. But maybe Poland wasn't affected because it was very rural and there wasn't a lot of trade going on there. I'm not sure why, because in many ways Poland was a crossroads between both the Mongol empires, the Tartar, all the different people who composed the Turks who were part of the Mongol Empire, the Alans, the Magyars, the Bulgars, and all these people. And then you also had the Hanseatic League, and then in the south of Poland, you had sort of this Ottoman or Byzantine. The Byzantine Empire didn't fall until the 1400s, technically. But you had the Ottoman Empire, you had the Byzantine Empire, and so on. So Poland was sort of at the crossroads of 3 or 4 different civilizations. So it surprises me to see those maps where they say there weren't really any casualties, or there were less casualties than other places. I still don't fully understand why that was. Thoughts on Zimbabwe and clicking language? That's very foreign to me. I don't know how that came about. But there is a thing with the Indo-European languages that they're very vowel. They've got vowels and they've got consonants, and there's certain universal rules. And I also believe that at some point in the past, when we look, whether we're looking at the Turkic language, there's all kinds of what is the term? Not panspermia. But anyway, there's a kind of concept that all languages originate from a single source. We do know that all peoples who left Africa have a common descent and a common lineage and a common Neanderthal lineage. And I think that when we look at, there's been a lot of attempts to find some kind of similarity between the Afro-Asiatic languages, or also known as the broadly Semitic languages. And then you've got the Indo-European, and you've got the Turkic, and you've got the Sinic, or the Chinese languages, the Japonic, the Korean. And some people hypothesize that Korean is an extension or related to the Altaic family. So people are trying to create these super families of different languages. And I think ultimately that the Turkic and the Indo-European and the Afro-Asiatic, I think they ultimately have a common ancestor. That would be how many thousands of years old, I don't quite know. But I think they do have a common ancestor, and that's why none of them really have clicking in them or these really weird, fantastical things. One thing about Africa is it's the most diverse continent because that's where humanity has existed the longest. And also, I think what you see in Eurasia is these big, vast empires that conquer everybody. So the Indo-Europeans, they just conquer everything from India to Ireland. And the Chinese, they conquer this giant valley basins and rice fields, and they have a huge population. So, and the Altaic family with the Turks, the Turks literally the Altaic family goes from Mongolia all the way to modern-day Turkey. You've got the Finno-Ugric, which, Finland, the Finnish Empire, the ancient Finnish Empire, actually did stretch from the Ural Mountains, and they did reach Hungary and Estonia. So you've got these really big imperial language families that spread out and conquer and convert people to their language. You don't see that so much in Africa. There's not... the biggest family in Africa is like the Afro-Asiatic, and I think number 2 is like the Bantu language family. And I'm sure there's some other families. They're like a Congolese family, perhaps. But there's a lot of different families, and so because these families are not challenged, and also another thing is that when you come into contact with other languages, you form a creole. When you form a creole, you have to simplify your language and make it understandable to other people. And so when you look at Eurasia, you look at the movements of people over time, the Silk Road, all these things, and ancient travel. I think that people traveled around quite a lot. I think the idea that people just sat in their village and never moved around. The Indo-Europeans are very nomadic. They traveled thousands of miles all the time. So people were traveling, and then there was a creolizing effect that languages had to become more similar. I don't think you got that as much in Africa. I think people were more spread out, more hunter-gatherer, especially in the South. And so you do get these clicking languages, which are highly specialized and highly different from anything else in the world. And that's because they basically weren't forced to creolize their language. With respect to the Indo-European, I believe Lithuanian and Latvian are some of the oldest. And I'm not sure. I think Lithuanian is technically the oldest in terms of the archaic forms. Russian also has a lot of archaic case forms, and it actually has multiple cases and multiple numbers. In English, we have singular and plural. In Russian, they have singular, dual, triune, or tertiary, whatever the technical term is, and then they have plural. But these kind of archaic forms where you're going to change the noun ending depending on whether it's one, two, or three, that is a very archaic form. That's a very particularistic form. That's something that's hard to learn unless you were born with it, speaking it as a baby or as a toddler. And so that's evidence of isolation, the fact that it did not have to be creolized. When you look at a language like English, which is very creolized because it's Anglo-Saxon, it's Norman, it's Latin, it's French, it's all these things thrown together. It had to be very creolized. And so English grammar is very easy. There's no noun endings. I mean, it's like bare bones as far as the grammar goes. And so grammar is like a very wild and crazy thing to English speakers. But of course, the spelling is what's terrible because we haven't creolized our spelling. For some reason there's almost like class affiliation. Like if you can learn this archaic spelling system, it's almost like China. They've got simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese. We just have traditional English. There is no simplified English. If you write simplified English, you look like a dummy. So there's a big class pressure on keeping the formalization of the English language. Those are the only three existentialists anyone has ever heard of. De Beauvoir is better known as a feminist. She otherwise just sat around while Sartre was getting in it with all his acolytes. The English R is a crime. So you prefer a more Fun fact, both Sartre and De Beauvoir were offered people. I think Camus was an excellent fiction writer. Camus was overrated. It would be hard to call German a beautiful language. Well, that's your opinion. We can all have different opinions, right? I've heard there are many concepts that capture what no other language can. I just have a weird thing where I'm able to listen to German, and I think Dutch, which is just as Faust will tell you, Dutch is just as German as the other German languages. In fact, Dutch is maybe even more German than the other German languages. And by German languages, I'm speaking of, you've got your Scandinavian, you've got your German, you've got, I guess, English to an extent. But Dutch, to me, is a very musical, sing-songy language. There's a certain beauty to it. It's not the same beauty. And it depends on who's saying. Obviously, if all you've seen are like Nazi speeches, you're going to think it's harsh and aggressive. But if you listen to like a beautiful woman sing German, and it's a nice, beautiful, melodic sound. I mean, the German language is more flexible than people think. German poetry. We could do some German poetry. Let's do reading German poetry. I'm just throwing out ideas here. I read German poetry. We'll find some things. We'll find some German poetry to read if people want that. Chaucer. Yes, I was thinking of Chaucer. I'm sorry. I couldn't remember Chaucer. There are no ugly languages, only ugly voices. Supposedly, clicky noises are less likely to attract animals than proper speech, which is advantageous to hunters. Very cool. Very cool. Yes, the hunter-gatherers of Africa are very well adapted to their environment. And, you have to appreciate, in the same way that I appreciate anyone or any creature on this earth who is specially adapted to their environment, we look at them today as, archaic and anachronistic. But ultimately, there was something beautiful about a group or a species or a, cultural adaptation where people are very well adapted to their environment. They are in tune with nature. They are they're part of the holistic environment, the ecology. There's something very harmonious about that. There are whistling languages also, which are also used during hunting. Yeah, if you have no internet and you're just sitting around all day with the boys, you can make up a bunch of languages. Like, language can become very specialized. I'm not enjoying all this social isolation. I'm introverted but feel more connected getting out of it. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's not good. It's not fun, but we're making the best of it. Frisian. Yes, Frisian is like a dialect of Dutch, basically, that's supposed to be closer to English. Ever heard of that whistling language that developed in the mountains? Well, I've heard of it now. Good thing I have Ken to keep me company during these dark times. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I'll keep doing this until they bust down my door and take my sardines or whatever. Take my. I don't think anyone's going to want my computer. I think they're just going to want my sardines. My favorite sounding language is Mongolian, yet the Mongolian throat singing is very impressive. Mongol sounds very airy, breathy. Mongolian is lovely. I'm quite fond of Schumann and Schubert, whose vocal music is German, and I don't enjoy it less for that. Yeah, I guess I haven't listened to a whole bunch of Schumann and Schubert, but I like, Goethe has some poetry that's good. There's a lot of good German poetry. You can take the German language and make it good. The problem is that Germany under Bismarck, not just under Bismarck, but under the late Holy Roman Empire, and especially after the Napoleonic Code came in 1808, and they started bureaucratizing everything. You see this with Lessing. Lessing is this literature writer. He writes, I guess, short stories. And you start to see the bureaucratization of Germany and the emergence of this merchant class and the emergence of a bureaucratic, I guess what they call the Amt, which is the office. So there's this Amtification of Germany that happens in the 1700s and then compounds with the Napoleonic Code, and then Bismarck compounds it further and makes altogether the Amt, the office, the state official, the customs official, the official of officials. I think I need some water. But this creates a linguistic pressure on Germany to be a combination language, the Verbindung language, where everything is pushed together and you get these really long words and these really awkward phrases that describe, because the thing about German is all the verbs are at the end whenever you have compounds. So the helping verb in English is having. I'm having a bad day. Well, I guess that's not the helping verb. I'm having to run. Maybe there would be the auxiliary or helping verb. I'm having to run. I guess in that form, to run would be the infinitive. I'm trying to think of another. I had run, or I had cooked a meal. Cooked is really the verb that we're talking about, and I had is making it a past participle. So in German, everything, when you're talking in the past, ich habe, I have, and then your verb goes all the way at the end. So English would be like, I have climbed up a mountain. I have climbed. If you cut off the sentence there, you know some information. Whereas in German, it's basically, I have up a mountain on a Tuesday with my friends, a mountain climbed. That's how German works. And, I still look at that like, gosh, that's really convoluted, but German people deal with it, I guess, because they listen to the end of the sentence. It's not a problem, and they have the memory to listen to the end of the sentence. If you're learning the language and you're trying to translate it, it's kind of discombobulating to have it like that. I know Latin is even more flexible in word order. The words can just be anywhere because the case designates what is in the nominative, what is in the accusative, what is in the genitive and the ablative and the dative. So you have these markers on your nouns that tell you what the function is, whereas in English, the subject always has to go first. The man eats the food. Whereas in German, I guess you can have, der Mann isst um, what I want to say Fuß, but that's a foot. Essen, das Essen. Der Mann isst das Essen. But if you say das Essen isst den Mann, well, now you've got the food is eating the man, and you can switch around the word order to make it. I guess it would be den Mann isst das Essen, because it's den as the article. Then of course that's the accusative. So it gives you more flexibility in word order when you have these markers on the words. In English, you can't do that. If you say food eats the man, well, then food is the subject. We don't have markers to indicate which is the subject and the object, unlike these more formalized languages. And so, or I don't know if you could say, I don't know if formalization is the proper word here. In inflected languages is perhaps the more technical term. Or the more mainstream term for describing what I'm getting at. But you have in some of these languages like German, you have a lot of, again, bureaucratization of the language. That, oh, look at all these really long words. And again, that the reason why those words, those combination Verbindung Worten are created is because of the aspect of the verb being at the end. It allows you to squeeze a bunch of nouns together without having verbs in between them. And the bureaucrats go crazy with this, and in the same way that bureaucrats go crazy with everything. Okay, we're going to have a law, but then we're going to have a law that regulates the rules of the law, and then tertiary, and they just go on and on and on, never dealing with the practicality or the beauty of the language, just thinking about how do I get my job done and how do I extract more taxes? And so that mercantile mentality extracts a toll on the German language in terms of having, your beauty and your poetry. But there is a way to speak German, I think, that is beautiful and poetic. And it can be achieved. And especially as you go back further in German history, Walter von der Heide? Anyway, Walter von something, I forget where he's from. Walter is this very old German poet. I think he's from, the 1200s, 1100s, 1300s. That's the fascinating thing about English is because, unlike English, where English, if you go back before 1500, before 1400, it's like unrecognizable. You look at it and it's like, this language is German, and then the Normans come and they totally make it a different language. Whereas with German, you can kind of recognize and understand German a lot further back. Now, when you look at Walter von der... Now, I'm going to be very upset if I don't look this up right. Walter von der... or Walter von Dane. Where is he from? Walter von der Vogelweide. I don't know where Vogelweide is, but he was living around 1170 to 1230, and he has some good poetry because this is prior to the bureaucratization of the German language. And so you look at what maybe we can take a look at some of this stuff. Du von der Vogelweide, wie du über Heide mit hoher Stimme schellet, was wunders sie stellet, wie Spähes organiert, wie ihr Sankt vandaliert, ich meine aber in dem Done, daher von Zeitherone, da du, or I don't know if it's do or Dewey, or Diu, da Diu Gottina minne, gebuetet uf und inne, du diust da se hova Kameraien. And that is the nightingale of Vogelweide, how she carols over the heath in her high, clear voice, what marvels she performs, how deftly she sings in organon, which is a plain chant melody from the Middle Ages, how she varies her singing from one compass to another in that mode, which has come down to us from Kytheron, which is a Greek island, on whose slopes and in whose caves the goddess of love holds sway. She is mistress of the chamber there at court. So if you look at some of the words here, du von der Vogelweide, that's just modern German. He, wie du über Heide, so Heide is heath, über, du, wie. The only one that's different to me is he, or high, which means how. Or no, it doesn't mean, I don't think it does mean how, because wie means how. So I think he is actually a z in modern German. Mit hoher Stimme schellet. And Stimme is voice, with, high, and I guess schellet means clear. Was wunders sie stellet? Stellet here means perform, and that's basically modern. You can even hear, what wonders she shows. Stellen means to show, or to place a forth. So, was wonders she shows. So you can see that German has retained a lot of its qualities. This is almost 1,000 years ago. This is like 800 years ago. And you can still look at this. Now, of course, the script was technically a Latin script that I guess later developed into a Fraktur script. So I don't know if I could read the original text because the way that people wrote the Latin script varies from time to time, and especially you look at German cursive. I can't read German cursive; it's way too difficult for me. But yeah, I think if I could read that, if I practiced that poem, or someone who's a really good rhapsode practiced the poem and could make that something beautiful, and people have put. And I'm looking at this. That was not by Walter. That was a poem commemorating Walter, written in the 13th century. So I don't know. I was looking on Wikipedia. I was trying to just pull up something that would be the original 12th century or 13th century. There's some song texts. Exas or saz. Ich sag mit meinen Augen. Ich sag mit meinen Augen. Yeah, this is a little bit more archaic than the 13th century stuff. There's a lot of umlauts everywhere that look like little carrots. Ich sag mit meinen Augen Mann und Weib taugen. Das ich gehörte und gesagt, was jemand tat, was jemand sprach. So I saw with my eyes one man and women together that I heard and saw something everyone, I think, that everyone did and everyone said. I don't know what swaz means. But yeah, that's a little bit of Walter von der Vogelweide. Let's take a look what's going on. That whistling mountain language is definitely bogus. No way it can communicate anything other than very simple messages. The bugification. Where does Kenneth come up with half the stuff he talks about? I don't know. I didn't have a topic today. Is it ever silent in his head? No, I mean, is life ever silent? Life always has a rhythm to it. The universe has a rhythm. So in a sense, the universe is made of music that's always playing, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But I don't know that there is such a thing as pure silence, except maybe in death, in non-existence. That would be silence. But so long as we live, we have a rhythm, we have a music to us. And if we listen to that rhythm and we bring it out of us, then we can talk about it, or it can, the rhythms, the colors that we see, I guess I have a sort of synesthesia, or I have a discursive method where one thing reminds me of another, and I just sort of follow that mode of the rhapsode of the muse, and I sort of listen to these different rhythms and I play one off the other. It's kind of like playing jazz, right? You start with a basic melody and you get funky with it and you play around with it. So I think, to me, the way that I structure my ideas is kind of similar to, and it's funny because I don't listen to a lot of jazz, but I think it is a good metaphor. If you mean silbo, it's a whistled register. It follows the rules of Spanish. Daily reminder, there were up to 30 people on John Locke streams. I don't know that there were up to 30 people on the John Locke stream. I don't remember that. I remember like there being 6 viewers, which is funny because when I was doing those John Locke streams, I had like 6 viewers and I said, "Oh, this is just because I'm reading John Locke. Nobody wants this." But then actually I would talk myself and do a stream, and I would also have 6 viewers recently. So I don't know. Maybe we'll go back to reading Locke. If people vote for it, I'll take a look into it. I will take a look into it. What have we got here? I'm probably making that up, but let's not let that distract us from the real message here. Does Ken smoke or do drugs? No. I've been around people who smoke and do drugs, but they asked me, "Hey man, you wanna puff? You wanna try it? Here, I'm being kind to you. I'm giving you something for free. Don't you want to just try it?" I always say no thanks. When I was younger, hanging around a bad crowd, which I tried not to do, but sometimes, as Mr. Coolmug says, it's hard for me to say no. So somebody's like, you should come over, you should hang out, you should try this. And rather than storming out and being like, "You guys are smoking the devil's lettuce, you're all going to hell," I would just be like, "No, that's not for me." And these weed people would always argue with me as if like, they would argue with me in the same way that I imagine like Christian apologists or the door knockers. You knock on somebody's door. It's like, I've actually had this happen to me where they take little kids. They took like an 8-year-old kid, and I was sitting in a public place and he came up to me. He's like, "Have you accepted Jesus into your heart?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have." So, people don't need to use you as like a proselytizer. It was very awkward on a number of levels because some other people were there with me at the time. But it's sort of like that kind of mentality with the weed people. When you say no to weed, they have like every argument in the book. It's like, well, it's going to open your mind. It's a social thing. Why are you so anal retentive? What's your problem? Were you abused as a child? Like they just go through everything. And I'm just like, "No, that's fine. I'm good." And you try to do that, and I guess I'm very persistent and stubborn, and it's part of my mentality of I like to be different, I like to be an individual. And so, whereas in the 1960s, smoking weed was a sign of nonconformism, that I'm different, I smoke weed, I'm outside the box. For me, I always viewed it as the thing that teenagers did, and I always wanted to differentiate myself from that and show, I guess, my strength and my power and my agency, that I had that self-control. And there's something religious about that, even though I wasn't religious at the time, or I didn't describe myself that way. I started to see these tendencies that I have as sort of religious. Who's the guy who keeps changing his name? Melchizedek on YouTube talks about this, but he also, as far as I know, doesn't leave his videos up, so you can't go watch him. At least I haven't checked on him in a while. I think I'm subscribed to one of his channels, but I think he continues to delete them and remake them. I think his last name was Olaf Anderson. A rare sighting of Mr. Arvel in the wild. Aardvark, the appearance of the old ones. Oh man, this what a meme. I always envisioned Ken and Eric kicking back with some crack rock after doing streams. Wow, amazing. Thank you, Hector. That's beautiful. Goes to show that these online personas are hard to place IRL. Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, that's funny, but also not funny. Who has come, the former conjures to the present of the audience's imagination. Yeah, there is so we have I run, I am running, um, I do be running though. There's all kinds of things you can mess around like with the continuous. German doesn't have the continuous. Ich renne. That's the present, and you only have one form of the present, ich renne. And that can be continuous, or it could be something happening at the present moment, or it could be something habitual. You don't really know just by the form of the word. Whereas we have I am running, I be running, I's running. You have these different things. I am running versus I run. I run implies, oh yeah, I run. It's a habit versus I am running. I'm presently at this time running. So we have that helping to be verb. German also makes use of sein, which is the being verb, where Heidegger gets Dasein. So there is a sense in which English does have a little more flexibility, and I guess I don't know if that's a case or a tense or what you would call that, but that is something that German lacks. Kenneth reminds me in the way of young Arvel back in the day. The two of them probably only Arvel did drugs. Yeah, I haven't been big on the drugs. People have always told me, like, dude, you're high. Like, when I get into these conversations with people in real life, they're like, dude, are you high? You look high. Your eyes, you look like you're high. They're bloodshot. You're talking about crazy things. You must be on drugs. Oh, it would be so cool and awesome to see you on drugs. That would be cool and awesome. I guess for me, the sensation of being on drugs is like when I get really tired. That to me is I can sense my perception is warped, or if I get really hungry, or if I exercise intensely. I mean, that is a change of my perceptual field. So that to me is like drugs in a way. But drugs cost money. They're expensive. They have side effects. And, I feel like I'm an imperfect person. I don't need drugs to help me be less of a perfect person. Mine is death metal sorcerer. Kenneth is a conservative. No, I'm just straight edge. Being straight edge doesn't mean you're conservative. I have had alcohol. I don't think I drank much alcohol till a couple years ago. This is like 2018. So I didn't drink alcohol for a while. And then I had the opportunity where I said, I have no responsibilities, so I'm just going to, everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to get drunk as well. And these people are going to take care of me. I don't have to worry about, whatever. And I just was not worried. Since then, it's like, I got things to do. I got responsibilities. I don't surround myself with people who like to party. And that's probably cost me certain social relationships. I mean, fraternities are actually a great way to network. And in business, I mean, there's all kinds of businesses where if you go out drinking with people, you're going to make connections. So I probably lost certain friends and connections because they were like, hey, want to go out for a drink? And I was like, actually, I don't drink. And they're like, oh, okay, you're a weirdo. I'm going to stay away from you. And there is something interesting about drinking where it does bring certain aspects of a personality out of someone. And so it is a way of getting past the BS and seeing who somebody actually is. Like if someone gets really depressed when they're drunk, you're sort of seeing an aspect of themselves that they wouldn't show otherwise. Or if they get angry, or if they get jovial, you sort of see how much self-control does this person really have. Because if they have weak self-control and then they start drinking and they start acting ridiculous, it kind of shows you what they would do under pressure or under stress. So I do think there's a functionality to drinking and seeing how somebody acts when they're drunk. As far as I can tell, I mean, yeah, I get a little bit rude. I get a little bit inconsiderate. I get a little bit jovial. I don't think I really get depressed. But then again, I've never drank while alone. That's something I think is absolutely, in my book, that's absolutely taboo. Or that's the word. I mean, to me, it's like, because I knew people in high school who were depressed who would go in their basements and get drunk. And that picture, to me, I put it alongside like cutting your wrists. I have a disgust reaction to it. I don't know his worldview that well, only seen a couple of streams. Oh, Quitus Veritas, it's time to educate you on my worldview. Hector says, I know his worldview completely. Hope you guys are in good health. Same to you, South Korean ambassador. Personality wise, I mean, Arvel was a pantheistic nihilist when I first subbed to him. That's a very long time ago. Maybe he should get out and be less conservative then. Not if that's the, I don't know. I don't know if I am going to take Hector Quinn's life advice. Worldview is a psyop. My worldview or just worldview in general? My worldview, let's see how quickly I can say this. I started to talk about the I guess, creative minority and the tripartite class system. That's basically how I analyze things. I basically say, look, functionally, most people are followers, and followers are good, and there's nothing wrong. And I don't hate people who are followers, but most people are followers. They don't really change the directionality of history. They just change the intensity of it. And so what's really important is that you can get people who are these creative minorities who can create historical directionality. And the three classes or the three types that I see are warriors who are able to win wars, which is important, merchants who are able to make money, which is important, and priests who I view as a sort of pure mediation. They're mediating between different classes, they're mediating between different types of people, they're mediating between men and women, they're codifying rituals. There's also a shamanistic function, so there's sort of a priest-shaman distinction within that class, so we can drill down into it. So there's a lot of interesting things in there. That's kind of my worldview, and that's part of why I'm not a nationalist, because the nationalist believes in majorities and the idea that we have to get everyone on the same boat, and we have to, it's all about our people and our ethnic group and things like that. I look at history and I see a complete mixture of ethnicities. There's a certain quote about the German nation that, Germany is made up of all kinds of ancestral groups. And that's, if you actually look into the history of the beliefs of people in the 20th and 19th century, before crazy liberalism took over, people really did believe that there were many different groups within these nations that were distinct, and that those distinctions in some way were more important than, the difference between a Frenchman and a German. So more difference within the group than between different groups. People can call that Lewontin's fallacy if they like, but I'm not talking about IQ necessarily. I'm talking about, different classes of people. Wherever you go, you're going to find average people, you're going to find mediocre people, and how they are led is going to determine the quality of the country overall. If you have good leadership, then you can take, just look at somebody who abuses their dog versus someone who trains their dog well. Now, of course, different dogs have different abilities and whatever, but I would rather live in a household with a person who trains their dog well, even if it's a mutt, than live in a household with a purebred dog who's been abused at the end of the day. So I would rather live in a country where everyone's mixed up and multicultural and it's all crazy town. But because there's good leadership and it's a solid class structure and there's good institutions, that makes a good country, versus you've got these very quote-unquote homogeneous countries that I think are in an absolute disaster. I think there's also an element of deeper culture, mass psychology, and what I would even say is spirituality, that in a Spenglerian sense, you look at these cultures and they're very homogeneous, but very problematic and probably will not last this century. I mean, it's just the case that you look in the past, and the people who lived in Europe prior to the Indo-Europeans, we don't know what their languages were. We have fragments of Etruscan, we have the Basque language, we have these little, hints of what it might have been. But the truth is that cultural groups get wiped out and they get superseded by other groups. And so we're going to see a lot of cultural groups that are just wiped out in the next century. And that is That is not nothing new. That is just historical. When nationalists say, Europe for the Europeans and Africa for the Africans and Asia for the Asians, that's not history. History is there were Greeks in China and there were Africans up in Greece and there were, all kinds of people all over. So the idea that, in the past, people never mixed, and if you mix people, it's terrible. I don't see history as really conforming to this sort of very formalistic, specific. I'm not going to use the word. I'm not going to use the word I'm thinking of, but it's like it's very much this idealistic, like, I want things to be the way I want. It's very libertarian, because a libertarian says, you know what, everything would be efficient if we just had a free market, and the market would correct for all these externalities, and then we wouldn't have bureaucracy, we wouldn't have the problems of the state and the tragedy of commons and so on and so forth. And I say, yeah, that's true, but how do you go from point A to point B when you have these things called empires and religions that are collective and conglomerate, and through the reign of quantity, they overcome your little qualitative little anarcho-capitalist city-state. So ultimately, I think that it's not that nationalism doesn't work in the abstract or we can't point to a historical example. I'm not going to say that in some sense, like, you can't have your little hobbit shire in the abstract, or we can't point to it, or that I don't even value it. I do value the idea of having a home and an identity, but we're going into a historical period like the Mongol invasion of Russia, like, the ancient invasion of Europe 10,000 years ago, like the invasions of the Indo-Europeans. We're going into a time of global mixing, and we're going to have to deal with that in an effective way. If you just kind of cry about it and wish that it weren't so, and pretend that everything is, confirmation bias. Oh, the coronavirus is going to bring back nationalism. And my short take is, coronavirus is putting people on the internet, and the internet is a globalizing force. I have other points about it as well, but I think that's probably the strongest argument, or one of the strongest arguments. So that's the rehearsed points. I don't know if you have questions about my worldview. I think that's as condensed as I can get it. The Bible says to enjoy the flower of our youth. I don't think this is the Hector. When you hate the Bible, and then you say this is what the Bible says, maybe you can quote a verse or something, and I'll consider it. But I don't know. We're all shut-ins now. That's what I mean. I'm not naturally. I'm quirky. Sub to my OnlyFans. Fourth Density used to be a quality poster, and then I think at some point Fourth Density just gave up and decided to make these very obscure inside jokes that only Fourth Density understands. Tinder sent a message to everyone telling them not to go on dates. Hector, you shouldn't, I guess if I said, Hector, why are you on Tinder? He would say to me, oh, well, I'm not on Tinder. I've just heard from other people or something. But I don't know about that guy. Working online now. My town is under curfew. Oh, that's not good. I hadn't heard about that. Ricardo Williams, we're here for you, Ken. Don't do it. All right, let's go to... Is Ken anal retentive? I mean, that's a Freudian phrase, right? So all anal retentive means, it's a very weird theory, like the idea that, people don't want to poop, they're constipated because they don't like fecal matter. It is a very weird theory, but on some level it does, the metaphor, whether there's any kind of true to the original theory, the metaphor of the anal retentive personality is effective. And so I guess to me it just means, if you actually read Freud, he said that basically anal retention, or that attitude of putting up your Western armor and putting up your membrane and not letting people in and being resistant to new ideas and things like that, being particular, that's necessary for civilization. So I think we're all, at the end of the day, if you're just dude, weed, open your mind, just let everybody in, peace, love, and everything, bro, you can't build a civilization. You can have some chill surf vibes, And you can probably pick up some chicks, but you can't really build a civilization off that. MJ is a horrible substance. Why is anal retentive a phrase? Because of Freud. Ironically, the lock streams were funnier than streams with deliberately silly topics. Well, it was kind of silly, wasn't it? My friend Melky living Gaul. Weed is lame. Melky. Even that is gone. Anal retentive is euphemism for constipated. Yeah, but it's like a deliberate constipation. I go back to lock streams now. That was a nice era. It was a good era. It was a good era. You know, maybe we should go back. You got to vote though. If you vote for the lock streams, right now it has 1 thumbs up and it has 1 face vomiting emoji. So there are some people who are not amused. People who are high are dumb, not interesting. I remember reading Carl Sagan when I was young, and he advocated for smoking weed. He was like, actually, marijuana heightens my consciousness. I think Richard Feynman was similar. All these like 1980s they weren't children of the 1960s, but they were in college in the 1960s. So by the 1980s, they're like in their 40s, and they're like, actually, like smoking weed opens your consciousness. So I remember reading that and being like, huh, you know, if Carl Sagan does it, then maybe it's a good idea. But I guess I just didn't trust Carl Sagan enough. That was back in the Reddit days. Or even before that, I think I was reading him. Do you think Timothy Leary, famous 1970s hippie era promoter of dosing LSD and toking the green, actually was a counterculture CIA asset? Hard to be radically socialist when you're stoned. I don't know who Timothy Leary is. I guess I could look him up, but I mean, it's possible. I mean, look, when people say that the United States government attacked the black community and tried to get them all addicted to drugs, like, I don't even think that's necessarily false. It's like here's the thing about conspiracy theories, or the idea that there's an elite that controls everything and, you know, micromanages everybody's lives. That's like a very, how do I say this? If we just say that's flat out wrong, there's still an emergentist view that basically says bad things happen, and if the government doesn't take actions to stop those bad things, they're essentially endorsing them. So like when the Ferguson's riots happened and the government didn't stop it, that was essentially endorsing it. So when we have these waves or we have these emergent events and the government does nothing to stop them, to me, they're culpable. To me, they're responsible. And so when these drug waves happen and the government didn't do anything to stop them, they had the quote-unquote war on drugs, which all it did is it created a huge black market. And the CIA was part of that black market. It's like, I don't know what you say about that. I don't know where you go from that. You know, I don't know how you cannot hold the government culpable. How would I have stopped the drug craze? Well, drugs are they're a way to change your perception, and they're also communal. And I think the fact that people wanted to change their perception and they wanted community is evidence that old forms of perceptual modification and community were dying. And so I think essentially you need fanatical religion. You need, religious experiences where people can have a modification of their perception, and where they can have community. And I think that I would have nationwide, if I was a majoritarian leader in the 1960s, I would have some kind of nationwide exercise program, Boy Scouts, basically. And I would, enforce religion and new religious forms and things like that. I think that would have been effective, but the government didn't want to do that. The government wanted to destroy old majoritarian religion and replace it with something that would be, it would stone everybody and make people even dumber and whatnot. Ramdas was Leary's counterpart, became a Hindu devotee. Leary went a very different route. Everyone was a CIA asset in the 70s. Yeah, there were a lot of like radical socialists who were associated with the FBI and CIA. Faith in the age of coronavirus on my TV. Drinking seems to me an integral aspect of European culture. Okay, well, not every European person drinks, and I don't know that historically they have. When I get drunk, all I want to do is talk about philosophy and crazy ideas. Most of the time, I have nobody to talk to about these things because all my friends are normies. When I get drunk, I just vibe. I only have 2 real friends. Yes, but I have no weak connections. I currently have literally 0 contacts beyond those 2 close friends. Was chat even talking about ethnicity? I brought it up because Quides Veritas was asking me what my worldview was. Every commenter gives up eventually. Ken doesn't respect me anymore if he ever did. I'll have to work hard to change his mind. Yeah, you'll have to prove to me that you are not on dating websites having casual sex outside of your relationship. You're going to have to prove that to me, and then I will respect you more. Anal retentive is just another word for Apollonian. Okay. Is posting on Twitter all day superior to streaming? Well, I wouldn't know. I haven't tried. I don't know how to vibe. It's either depression or obsession for me. Yeah, you gotta be, if you're depressed, you gotta become obsessed. The cure for depression is going to Alaska and building a log cabin and like fighting bears and running 5 miles every day. Literally, if you have depression and you run 5 miles a day, you will cure your depression. I don't care what the scientists say when they offer you the drugs that are going to kill your boners and, make you suicidal. I don't care what the doctors say. I can't care at this point. If you run 5 miles a day, you will not be depressed. If you are in the wilderness in a survival situation, you will not be depressed. If there are a lot of things you can do to solve depression that people don't want to do because they hate themselves and they ultimately want to punish themselves through depression. That's what, Christ talks about when he talks about the fires of hell. It's like we create our own little hells, our own little prisons, and we have the key. It's waiting there for us, and we could leave, but we, throw away the key, and we want to stay inside because we feel guilty. Christ says that hell comes from guilt, and we conceive, we broke God's law, and now he's going to punish us. That's so unfair because, why did he allow us to sin and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not about that. It's about, there are things that are good or bad for us, and we choose to do bad things because we feel guilty. It's this problem of guilt, and so you have to somehow overcome your guilt. That's what Christianity is about. Once you overcome your guilt, then you're able to forgive yourself because Christ has forgiven you. So it's like you have permission to forgive yourself, and then you can actually leave your depression or whatever has you tied down, however you're punishing yourself, and then you can actually do things that are good again, and you can live life again. You don't have to be in prison anymore. You can be free. Real depression or meme depression. All depression is meme depression, dude. Depression is not real. If you are depressed, you just need to live a more intense life. If you are depressed, you need to take risks. You need to do something challenging. You need to make sacrifices. You need to get your blood pumping. You need to be physically exercising your body. You need to be engaged in a life or death struggle. You need to be encountering death on a daily basis. The only people who get depressed are people who are not getting in fights, who are not fanatical, who are not, who are not living life. That's the people who get depressed. Now, there are some people who have a sanguine personality, who are just happy and bubbly all the time. They're always smiling, and they could just be at home knitting a sweater, or they could be watching TV, or they could be cooking a nice meal or whatever, and they're going to always be happy. And that's a certain personality of the 4 humors. But people who are melancholic, it's okay to be melancholic. It's not a bad thing to be melancholic because melancholic people are obsessive and they get things done that other people can't do because they're so obsessive. Melancholic people are some of the most resilient people in the world. You can put a melancholic person in a survival situation and everyone else dies because they couldn't endure the pain. A melancholic person when you unlock the potentiality of their personality, which, depression is the bad aspect of it if it goes the wrong way, but under the correct circumstances, the melancholic depressed person has the potential and the seed inside them. Like, when you try to lock them, like you've got a bunch of slaves and they've got chains around their feet and their arms or whatever, and everyone's like, oh, we can't escape. Like, the melancholic person, when you unlock, they just don't care. Like, the apathy of depression, the reversal is there's nothing that can stop them. They make the fanatic, they make the fearless war because they are not afraid of death. And so they're the ones who are going to cut off their arm or foot or whatever in order to escape the chains, to survive, when everyone else is like too afraid to cut off their limbs. Like, that's a metaphor for what the melancholic person can do if they utilize their ability to just like not care at all about the consequences of things, which leads to depression. If you're like stuck in a suburban neighborhood, then you're depressed because you're like, oh, I don't care about anything. But if you're in a wartime scenario, if you're in a life or death struggle, then not caring about anything basically gives you superpowers. Like, you are fearless, you can do anything. So you have to unlock that potential. If you don't, you're going to be in a sad state for the rest of your life. Frequently smoking marijuana before the brain fully develops, mid-20s, can stagnate IQ. It's over for toe cells. Ken has weird gaps in his knowledge. Camus, Leary. How is that a weird gap? Who cares about those people? Like, who cares about some random weed smoker from the 70s? Who cares about some French intellectual? Literally, why? How is that a gap? That's like, Ken has some weird gaps in his knowledge. He doesn't know what I ate for breakfast this morning. How is that a weird gap? Who cares? LOL, people actually smoke marijuana. Real depression, but I'm working on fixing it. Large part of it is caused by my poor lifestyle. You should read some Bradley on the stream instead of Locke. How many votes has Bradley gotten? Reading Bradley. Let's see how many votes reading Bradley can get. I read Bradley. All right. That's a new option there. Bradley, BTFO, space, time, causality, relations, motion, things, selves, nature, and matter. Interesting. Yeah, BTFOing is so 2019. Live, laugh, love, bro. I'm live, laughing, and loving. It's a live, laugh, love kind of stream. BTFOing, space, time, causality, relations, motion, things, selves, nature, and matter. It sounds like the inverse of Locke. Locke is like, he talks about all those things as well. But Locke is like, these are real things, and we don't have innate ideas about them. We can only observe them. And Bradley, I guess, is saying, therefore, they don't exist. If they're not innate, they don't exist. I'm not in a relationship, dude. Haven't been for months. Well, that's sad to hear. I didn't know that. My sister is married to someone she met on Tinder, and they have a family. Pretty much everyone is meeting online now. There's a difference between going on Christian Mingle, going on a couple of like dinner dates where you sort of meet somebody and then you find out if you want to continue dating, and then you find someone you're interested in, and then you date for a period, and then you decide to get married. There's a difference between that and like swipe, swipe, swipe. You want to meet up, casual sex. There's a qualitative difference between the two uses of online dating. So just saying like, oh, everyone's on Tinder. Well, different people use it in different ways. Please look into diet and gut flora relations to depression. Yeah, that's obviously an aspect there as well. Have some kombucha, man. Have some of that kefir. That's gonna help. Kenneth, let me beat the depression out of you, Brown. Legitimately, if you have a father who just beats you silly when you're young, it's hard to form depression. I think. And again, I don't support beating children. I'm not for that. I'm not a violent person. But just objectively, when you have a suburbanite culture where dads don't, spank their kids and stuff, then you get a bunch of depressed kids who cut themselves. Women go on Tinder and they want dudes to choke them out. And they cut themselves. They want to be physically harmed because they feel guilty. If their father once in a while would give them a spanking or something, maybe on some level that's what they want, and they I don't know. Again, I don't do it. I don't endorse violence or whatever. I'm just observing that, and I don't think that's how we should do it. Again, I'm not. I don't spank people, you know. But what I will say is, I don't have any kids to spank. Okay, so I haven't even come to that situation. Hector is saying if you were beat constantly as a child, you would grow up to be depressed. I don't think that's true. I think if you're beat constantly, you're likely to become more sadistic. Um, I know that Chris Langan was beat as a child. I know John David Ebert was beat as a child, and they don't seem very depressed to me. I don't think it's necessarily going to make you a depressed person. Um, but obviously, it's not something to advocate. I'm just saying beating, or when your father beats you, it's an extreme scenario. It's a crisis in the life. And again, he's saying, my dad didn't spank me and I'm not depressed. Well, again, I'm not forming a one-to-one correlation between the two things. What I'm saying is that people seek out punishment and they seek out pain. And maybe part of the reason why we're so depressed is because we've eliminated every sort of painful stimulus. We've eliminated fasting. We've eliminated hunger. Everyone's obese. We've eliminated spankings. We've eliminated all these things. And so I'm not saying any one of these things. We've eliminated exercise, which is a form of self-punishment in a way. Even it feels good. It feels good to work your muscles, but you are working your muscles. You are extracting energy. So there's just a whole host of things where we've thrown those out the window. So now we don't confront challenge, so now we're depressed. I wouldn't isolate it to just spank your kids so they won't be depressed. Obviously, that's not a panacea. Obviously, I don't even advocate for that, but it's an observation of people. When you live in a suburbanite household where fathers don't spank their kids, then you have kids who grow up to cut themselves and drink, and they ask to be choked out, and you get these gay guys who want to be treated like they're women. Okay, and I think there is an environmental factor to that as well. And of course, there are genetic predispositions. I won't deny that. When I talk about the melancholic personality, I think there's a genetic predisposition to that. But I think there's a way to raise up a melancholic person, and there's a form of self-parenting that people can do to take their melancholic personality and to bring out the positive aspects of that, where I look at families where you've got very consistent personality types, but very different rearing strategies. So families from the early 20th century where you've got people who are very similar from father to son, very similar, but one of them is like a hardcore military man, gets it done, like very obsessive, very straight and narrow. And then the son kind of gets off the track, and then the grandson is just totally wiped out. So, I can see how, and again, like that's not like a statistical proof or something. I don't have a study for you, but I'm just kind of saying that, I think as you take away challenges from people in general, and yeah, maybe the spanking example is not the best one. My father was a nice man. I love him and I'm not depressed. I'm not advocating that you have a brutal, tyrannical father, although, if you look in the past, there were a lot of those fathers, like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. There were a lot of brutal fathers. Also, in times of war, trauma also caused fathers to be more violent. But I don't advocate for that. I don't think I would be that kind of father. What I'm saying is that essentially, if you do something really bad, really out of order, as I think we've all done as children, we've already all done something that was just terrible. We knew we shouldn't have done it. We broke the china, or we, ran away from home when we shouldn't have, or we, didn't feed I guess not feeding the dog is not the worst thing in the world, but there's a lot of things that we did wrong. And so occasionally, I'm not saying every day, but maybe a couple times a year or something, I don't think spankings are the worst thing in the world. And I think you've got these parents who are super permissive, hyper permissive, these Gen X parents who are like, I'm going to give my children all the money, and here's a credit card, spend whatever you want, and I'm going to send you to an art school, and you can do whatever you want there. And they're like, the concept of art school training people in art is very interesting. I wish I went to film school. I wish I went to acting school or something like that. But I told myself I need to do something practical. I need to study something hardcore. But I think there's something good to it if you're disciplined and you take it seriously, as certain people have, and they've been very successful with that. But if you just have this blank check to do whatever you want, I think that's as abusive, as harmful as the guy who's beating his kids every day. It's just a different way to go about it, a different kind of abuse. It's really neglect. It's really neglect and permissiveness and spoiling the child. I'd say Ken is right, is about maybe 75 to 90% of depression cases. This majority can't be cured or can be cured by his methods. There's some forms of depression that are more resistant. And I'm willing to admit that I'm willing to admit that there are forms of depression where maybe it's so genetically ingrained in the person that even if you force them to run 5 miles a day, it wouldn't solve it. But you won't know until you try. And so people who think, oh, well, I'm the 10% who you just can't change. Well, have you tried running 10 miles a day or 5 miles a day? And if you're not willing to do that, you might need basically some kind of military drill officer who's going to, like a platonic officer, Plato's captain. You need a captain in your life who's going to force you to do that. And maybe there are people who go through the military and they go through boot camp and that doesn't solve their depression. But also boot camp's not as harsh as it used to be. I think hazing and fraternities also fulfill this need for punishment. I think on some level, men have this as much as women. Men feel the need to be punished. And so when you're forced to drink, a lot of alcohol, or you're forced to be spanked or whatever the weird the hazing that they used to do, beating people with bags of oranges, force them to drink a bunch of mustard and ketchup down their nose, and all these like weird, disgusting, freakish things. I mean, there are cultures that force, fellatio in order to become a man. Like, there are all kinds of weird rite of manhood rituals, but they're all about humiliation. And it's like once you go through that collective humiliation, or that individual humiliation, then it forms the collective because we've all gone through the same thing. And this is it's almost internalized scapegoating. Like, you get rid of your sin, you get rid of your individuality through this process, and you become part of the group. I think people who are depressed, it's not just about the physical, it's also about the social. People need to become part of fraternal orders, join a fraternity, join something where you're going to get hazed, and then you're part of the group, and then you have brothers who are loyal to you, you're loyal to them. I think that's a huge part of depression. When people are socially isolated, you feel like you've been evicted from the group. You feel like you've been isolated, you feel like you're an outcast, and so you feel depressed. If you are physically exercising and you have a loyal band of brothers, I'd say those two things together are going to eliminate most cases of depression. The first one, exercise, is accessible to everyone. You can do it in a prison, but socializing is a little bit harder, especially on the internet. I think Ken and I disagree on most things. He will pay for it and not be forgiven. Yeah, Hector, you should come on the channel sometime. We could have a nice chat. Suburban life makes no sense. Most kids in the circumstance are rotting away indoors, especially with decline of sports. Why create child just to have it be article of living furniture? Right, well, why have a hairless cat in your apartment? Why have a chihuahua? It's the same mentality. Ooh, I want a little cute, like, baby. Can we have a baby? It's going to be so cute. Can we have a chihuahua? Can we have a cat? It's going to be so cute. I'm going to hug it and love it and squeeze its little cheeks. That's the mentality that produces these depressed kids who are overdosing on opiates and cutting themselves and drinking, and they're on the internet and they're addicted to porn and so on and so forth. Yeah, so there's some side effects. Like, I guess, what is this, an Aristotelian mean here? We're not going to advocate for brutalistic physical punishment, but also the inverse, where you just are super permissive. And I think really people should be in a Mannerbund. People should be in a social class. The question from Rattle Grebdron is, can the priest class have a Mannerbund? It's obviously not going to be as physically intensive as a warrior mannerbund, but I think the monastery shows you what that would look like. Move to Singapore to weather out this storm in a safer environment. Start a Euro-America stands with China movement to revive ancestral consciousness. Okay. I think there was a guy over at VDare who tried to do that. Derbyshire. John Derbyshire has a Chinese wife, so I think he's tried to push that. I don't know that that's actually a legitimate concept. In the same way, I don't think racism is a legitimate concept. Like, there's no point in history where I can look at, like, all Europeans were united, all the Asians were united, all the Africans were united. No, that's not how history works. That's why I'm a minoritarian. I don't believe in these big racial blocks coming together and uniting. I agree with Toynbee about the creative minority. I don't agree that like racial or civilizational blocks are an effective sort of propagandistic idea. Maybe we would get there at some point in the future, but I don't think we're really at that point now. That's, I could get more into the minoritarian stuff, but let's keep reading. I had a girlfriend who asked me to physically abuse her. I never did. She also suffered from severe depression. She had been molested as a child. Well, that's very sad. But there are instances where people who are abused want to relive their abuse as a way of kind of working through it. There's actual social science showing that hitting your kids is linked to bad mental health outcomes. Well, correlation, not causation, because certain communities that beat their kids more also have worse outcomes. So you've got to control for a lot of factors. But I'm willing to accept that that is true, and that's why I don't beat my kids, and I wouldn't beat my kids if I had them. But I'm just saying that the problem of beating your kids is maybe you're going to have dumb, violent kids, but that's a different problem from what we have. The problems that we have now are a little bit different. The ennui, to use the French word, is what plagues us now. Euro-America is just vibing, bro. Can China be on another planet? Unfortunately, something about a Whig Party national consciousness. Spanking isn't freaky and disgusting. It's an occasional spice like chili. Well, I wasn't really speaking about it in the sexual case. I guess people can. What people do in the privacy of the bedroom, there's a distinction, right? There's a distinction that we can make. Depression related to physical disability is very hard to cure. I agree with you. I agree. If someone's in a wheelchair, but again, you actually look at who is the old 8chan moderator. He lives in the Philippines now. Hot Wheels, has a physical disability, and that did cause him to be depressed. He also was in the foster care system and all sorts of tragic stuff in his life, and I don't think he's depressed anymore. So there are things you can do to alleviate your depression. Is there a way to cure it if you're in a wheelchair, if you're paraplegic, if you're, a burn victim? I don't know if there is, but there's certainly things you can do to help that, and helping is a good thing. The 21st century will ultimately be shaped by civilizations that have the ability to mobilize economic and institutional power with the greatest effectiveness. Did you see Dugan's Facebook post linking Nick Land to coronavirus? It just looks like a big, poetic splurge. Can be paying alimony. I don't think I do be paying alimony, actually. But let's see how far we're into this. It's almost 2 hours, so we're going to end it there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for checking in. I might play some chess on DLive because with this coronavirus thing, I'm getting obsessed with chess again. I haven't been this into chess in a long time because it is a game, and of course, I don't play games. I'm a serious man. But we are getting into chess, so we might stream some chess on DLive. I might put on a comfy sweater or something. So if you want to check that out, I'll post the link in the chat, dlive.com/Kenneth Brown. Yeah, we might do that. We're supposed to do that all the time, but we only do it some of the time. We might do it for 30 minutes. We might also play Minecraft. We'll see. We'll see if the server is up. I might play some Minecraft. But that's it. That's all she wrote. Let's play the outro. See you next time.